Hi, welcome to the What Digital Camera video reviews. Today we're looking at the Nikon D3. For years now, Canon have had a big advantage in the professional market over Nikon because they've been the only manufacturer to have manufactured a full-size sensor. That is a sensor the same size as 35mm film. This means that when you take a lens from a 35mm camera, like say a 50mm, you put it on a digital camera. If it's a full-frame sensor, it's still going to give you the same 50mm field of view. Whereas on a camera with a smaller sensor, such as all the Nikons, that 50mm lens would become equivalent to 75mm. This was a particular problem at the wide-angle end, where, for example, a 12mm lens would suddenly become 18mm, making wide-angle quite difficult to achieve. There's also, of course, the argument about just purely the physically bigger sensor, high resolution, more pixels, bigger pixels, gives you better image quality, and that's something that Canon had an advantage over Nikon as well. That is, until now. Here it is. This is Nikon's first full-frame digital SLR, the D3. Obviously a professional model. It's the replacement for the D2X and D2H, and this is possibly one of the most revolutionary digital SLRs ever released. Now the Canon digital SLRs, their full-frame sensor was, and the 1DS Mark II was 17 megapixel, and in the Mark III it's gone up to 21 megapixel. So how many megapixels has Nikon decided to go for? Has it trumped the Canon? Well, surprisingly enough, it's given us 12 megapixels. That's the same on paper as the D300, which is their consumer semi-professional model, which is about a third of the price. So why are they giving us 12 megapixels? Well, several reasons. By keeping to 12 megapixels instead of going to say 21 or more as 24 or whatever what they could have done, it means that the individual pixels on the sensor are physically that much bigger than they would be if they had to cram more pixels on. It makes sense. The more pixels you have to fit onto a small space, the smaller those pixels have to be, whereas the fewer pixels mean bigger pixels. Now there are lots of advantages to bigger pixels, the main one being that they're better at gathering light. If you put a bucket on the roof when it's raining, a big bucket, a wide bucket, will collect more rainwater than a small bucket or a margarine tub or something like that. This means that those larger pixels, because they gather more light, it means that the signal doesn't have to be amplified as much to create enough for an exposure. So in short, bigger pixels mean better low light performance. Now when we talk about low light, we're not just talking about night time or indoors with the lights off. Low light happens all the time, especially if you live in England. Here we are in January, it's lunchtime on a January day, it's foggy, it's rainy, it's not very nice, and if I point the camera out the window now, I'm getting a meter reading at ISO 200 of a 30th of a second at f8. Now really that's not terribly useful for anything that involves any kind of action or movement. Probably in a couple of hours it'll be even less than that as the light starts to drop. Low light capabilities on a digital camera are very useful for so many reasons. Even on a bright day, you're photographing sport, you want fast shutter speeds, you're photographing something where you want wide depth of field, so you need a small aperture, and you're down to very slow shutter speeds. So this is something which is very, very beneficial if the results are good. Now, the trouble with having a full-frame sensor is, what about all those DX lenses that you've been buying? Suddenly, they're not going to fit this camera anymore. Because, of course, DX lenses are designed with a smaller diameter image that they produce is not going to cover the dimensions of a 35mm size bit of film, in other words, 36 by 24mm. Well, there's a solution. They thought of that because this camera is actually dual size sensor. There is, of course, a full-frame sensor, but you can switch to APS mode. And when you do that, the viewfinder displays the APS size area that you're working to, and then of course you can use all your DX lenses just as you would do on your D300 or on any other Nikon body. So that ability to switch from full frame to telephoto has various advantages. It means that if you're, say, a wildlife photographer, you've got some big lenses, you've got a 300mm lens. On the APS size sensor, that becomes equivalent to 450, so you've got really good telephoto capabilities. Whereas at full frame, if you've got a wide angle lens, which is a full frame wide angle, 12mm is 12mm, becomes 12mm. Now switching from one format to the other is very simple. You simply go into the menu, you'll see image area down here, you select that, and Auto DX crop on. Okay, Auto DX cron, there it is. Okay. Here you can see the different formats. You've got the FX format, which is what Nikon call their full frame format. Incidentally, it's not quite the same dimensions as full frame. It's a tiny bit smaller, but the difference is so negligible that it doesn't make much difference. DX format, which is their traditional 24 by 16 millimeter format, and there's also a 5:4 ratio format, which is the slightly squarer format used by most compact cameras, for example, and the 4/3 system uses that format too. So you can change that in the menu, and then when you look through the viewfinder, those marks are clearly identified, so you can see where your edge of your frame is going to be. Whilst we're looking at the LCD screen, it's worth pointing out that this is a 3-inch LCD screen with 920,000 dots, the same as used in the D300, which has been very highly praised, including by What Digital Camera. Basically, the resolution on this is absolutely fantastic. It means you can zoom in and in and in, really check the sharpness and detail at a very, very fine level, very, very easily. It also means it's easier to see in bright light because the image is brighter, crisper, sharper all around. You really have to see the difference between a normal resolution LCD screen and this high resolution one to appreciate the difference. So let's have a look at the card slots while we're here. I did say slots and not slot. When you open this, there you go. You've got 2 compact flash slots. Now this is extremely useful. You can use this in a variety of ways. You can have one as a backup, so you could fill one card and then switch to the second card. Or you can duplicate the images on both cards. You could put raw pictures on card 1, for example, and JPEGs on card 2. So it's very beneficial. Also, if you're a press photographer and you get into those situations, as happens, where you get asked to hand over your memory card because you've photographed something sensitive, then if you've got 2 cards and you've got them backed up on both, then you can give them a card, and of course they're not going to know you've got another one in there, which is also quite useful. So let's continue our tour of the camera body. Well, for Nikon users, most of these are going to be very familiar, these buttons. Over here on the top on the prism there, you've got the metering modes, 2-degree spot metering, color matrix metering 2, and center weighted metering. You've got the eyesight diopter correction over here. On the top you've got the shutter button, the on-off button, and a light for the LCD screen. You've got the button that's actually changed the exposure modes. And you've got exposure compensation. Over on the left side, you've got the bracket control, the flash modes button, and a lock which allows you to lock a certain aperture so you can't accidentally knock it. And around the bottom here, you've got your drive modes: single, continuous, low, continuous, high. This camera can shoot at 9 frames per second, up to 9 frames per second in a full frame. If you switch to DX mode, then it takes you to 11 frames a second, which is pretty impressive. And then there's a live view mode. That big question, does it have live view? Yes, here it is. It's reached on here. We'll come to that in a moment. And then, of course, you've got your self timer and your mirror lockup buttons. That's all on this side. Let's move over to the back now. Again, to Nikon users, some of these will be very familiar. The review button that lets you look at view pictures that you've taken. The delete button. There's the menu key. There's the magnify and for viewing the images that you've taken already. A lock button and an OK button. Over on this side you've got your focus lock. Your input dial is also one of those on the front too. You've got a front and back input dials. A lock and autofocus lock. You've got your input dial on the back here, your compass point pad here with the OK button in the middle. But you can lock that if you want to by turning that switch so that you can't jog it when it's against your body. And then your focusing points. There are up to 51 focusing points on this camera. You can select them in groups on the back here.